This year's Burton Benjamin Memorial Award will be presented by a man who has made press freedom history. 40 years ago, he successfully argued that the U.S. Espionage Act does not apply to publishers of the press, thus allowing the publication of the Pentagon Papers by the New York Times. Another legal victory established the reporter's privilege to protect sources. He has written extensively while teaching and furthering media law practice with his firm Debevoise and Plimpton. Ladies and gentlemen, here is a man who has used the power of the law to enforce the power of a free press, of free media in a free society. Please welcome First Amendment lawyer, CPJ board member, and former chairman, Jim Goodale. Jim.
I'm here to award the present, I should say, the Burton Benjamin Memorial Award to Dan Rather. We have had several American journalists who've come to the stage tonight who have been in the business for 21 or 30 years. Dan Rather, believe it or not, has been a reporter for 61 years. He started in 1950 as a reporter for Associated Press, and he continues today as the host of HDD News. Now, I have to tell you that Dan at dinner tonight told me also in 1950, since he loved baseball so much, that he tried out with the Victoria, Texas, Rosebuds, a Class D baseball team. I said, Dan, what happened? Couldn't hit the curveball, he said. Thank goodness he couldn't, because otherwise we would not be here tonight. From his beginning of his earliest career, he covered every event you can imagine, from Girl Scout cookie fairs to town meetings to baseball games, you name it. When he became associated with CBS, later he covered all the great stories of his generation, from Vietnam to Watergate. In 1981, he became the anchor of CBS News. Can you believe it? 31 years after he started being a reporter. In his capacity as anchor of CBS News, he made his reputation and set the agenda for the American society we know today. His coverage was vigorous, accurate, reliable. He became a major figure. We have heard from many people on the stage tonight, including Sandy and Christiane, and the importance of protecting journalists so they can gather and write the news. Dan has provided exemplar extraordinaire as to how to do that. The second reason we're giving him the award tonight is because of his courage. He has stood up to American presidents ever since he became associated with CBS News. The most told story of Dan's courage with respect to American presidents was with respect to President Nixon. After many battles with President Nixon, he stood up at a press conference and he received a round of applause. President Nixon said, "Are you running for president?" Dan shot back and said, "No, are you?" Secondly, he was courageous in writing the story that he did about the younger Bush's career in the Army and the younger Bush's failure to meet his obligations of military service. This was a highly controversial story. I'm here to tell you that all the facts in that particular program were substantially correct. I spent a great deal of time researching them. I wrote an article in the New York Review of Books if you want to read it, and Dan was correct. He did leave as a consequence of the controversy of that story. I'm sad he did, because he showed the courage in doing it. The courage of standing up to the government is the essence of the First Amendment. The relationship between the individual and the government, and the individual's ability to criticize the government, is known as political speech. It is the heart of the First Amendment. Dan has showed us how to go on that. Thirdly, well, I was going to do a riff here when you come to third, and you know what I was going to do? I was going to talk about Governor Perry, Dan's fellow Texan, but I decided, you knew I was going to do that, so I didn't do it. Now, let's see. Well, the third reason, seriously, is for giving the award tonight is for what Dan has meant to CPJ. CPJ would not be where it is today without Dan Rather. CPJ has prepared a documentary about its origins. In this documentary, there's an interview of Michael Massing, who is the co-founder of CPJ. Michael, at the very beginning of CPJ, was able to get some fellow typewriter correspondents to protect journalists in South America. But Michael did not know where CPJ was going. How would he get from where he was to perhaps even to here, if he could think of it then? The phone rang. This is Dan Rather. Michael Massing, then an unknown writer, practically fell out of his chair. Dan Rather said, "I want to help." So, what is the takeaway of the Dan Rather story? The takeaway is, don't ask Dan to protect freedom of the press. Dan will volunteer. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Dan, this is the Lifetime Distinguished Achievement Award for the cause of freedom of the press, the Burton Benjamin Award. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, my friend. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, my old friend Jim Goodell. Thank you, Michael Massing and Laurie Nadell, who started CPJ. Thank you to each and every board member of CPJ who's responsible for my being up here tonight. This award means something deeply within myself. I'm deeply grateful for it. I worked with and for Bud Benjamin for well over 20 years at CBS News. Since he passed about 20 years ago, so much has changed, and much of it not very good in journalism, and we've gotten used to it. One of Bud Benjamin's dreams was to expand the CBS Evening News to a full hour. And Bud wasn't thinking of filling it with soft features, helicopter shots, celebrity gossip, and punditry. He imagined an entire hour brimming with investigative reporting, exposés, and dispatches from around the world. It was a different time in journalism, a time when professional duty was patriotic and freedom of the press motivated and inspired newsrooms. I know it's hard to believe, but it's true. Newsrooms were not supposed to turn a profit. Frankly, news then was considered an acceptable loss leader on the balance sheet, a brand builder, and most of all, a public service. To keep our FCC license and the public trust, we had to use the public's airways in the public interest, at least some of the time. Yes, that's a whole lot of public, but that's the way it was. It's the way it should be again. Today, how we look and how we present information has become far more important than how we gather it. It's upside down and backwards. And the worst part is we have gotten used to it. The caretakers of the Fourth Estate have at times left the building unattended. Public interest be damned. It was Thomas Jefferson who noted in 1799 that our citizens may be deceived for a while and have been deceived, but as long as the presses can be protected, we may trust them for light. Jefferson trusted the press not to stir up heat, but to deliver insight. Of course, freedom of the press and of speech both come with pitfalls. People can peddle opinions as if they were facts. Those armed with the biggest, expensive megaphones drown out those blowing whistles. But now we see our fellow citizens concerned and fearful, some of them taking to the streets about the direction of the country. And that, my friends, is our cue to get back to work. As the people of our nation begin rising up in concern about the economy and where the country is headed, they expect the business of news to be about inquiry and accountability. And luckily for us, we can still do that. But it often will not be within the confines of big corporate media. As you know, we are living in an age when big money owns everything, including the news. That cash bought a lot of silence for a long time, enough time for too frequently unchecked power to get this country tangled into messes all around the world. We all know that money talks, but let us remind ourselves, so do the people. They tire of conflicts at home and abroad, conflicts that avert our eyes from the corruption and callousness that does little more than damage our economy, spill our blood, and misspend our treasure. We had fed the heart on fantasies, wrote William Butler Yeats. The heart's grown brutal from the fair. In other words, we have gotten used to it. What happens to a country when the press helps divide a society and divide people into strictly us and them? What happens in a country when the press fans the flames of conflict and calls it reporting? We need, and I certainly include myself in this, my friends, to restore at some point the teaching of the craft of journalism. The best way to protect journalists is to teach them how to do journalism, and therefore protect themselves from becoming irrelevant. I am reminded of the finest speech ever made on the subject of television journalism. It was given by Edward R. Murrow in 1958. Murrow said, "This instrument can teach, it can illuminate, and yes, it can inspire, but it can do so only to the extent that humans are determined to use it to those ends. Otherwise, it is merely wires and lights in a box." Dear friends, from both the journalist and corporate worlds, we must untangle the wires from the lights. We have to halt the steady decline of over-the-air journalism and the endless compromises to the boardroom. I know some say it is too late, that our Congress wrote our epitaph in 1996 when they all came together and passed the heavily lobbied Telecommunications Deregulation Act. Since then, the lights in a box have gotten brighter and flashier, but the truth, dimmer and dimmer, and we have gotten used to it. The late, great Molly Ivins used to tell a story about what happens when fear grips a country. Molly loved to tell the story about her late friend, the celebrated Texas libertarian John Henry Faulk, who, as a boy of 6, went with his 7-year-old friend, Boots Cooter, to rid the family henhouse of a harmless chicken snake. From its high perch, the boys found themselves suddenly eyeball to eyeball with the snake. Growing up in Texas, it's not uncommon to see a chicken snake, but being close enough to spit in the snake's eye turned to be quite disconcerting for the boys. The two boys ran out of the henhouse so fast they nearly tore off the henhouse door, not to mention doing damage to themselves in the process. When Faulk's mother reminded the boys that chicken snakes are not dangerous, Boots Cooper responded, "Yes, ma'am, but some things will scare you so bad you'll hurt yourself." That is what we have been subject to as a country. We have been so afraid, so hell-bent on destroying enemies, both real and imagined, both foreign and domestic. We have hurt ourselves, and we have diminished our freedom and damaged our democracy. You're probably asking yourself now what you should do. Well, it may take courage. There are so many wrongs to make right. It's going to get messier before it gets better. We have to begin asking the hard questions once again. We have to demand and earn back the respect that gave us the right to ask those questions. We must protect the whistleblowers by using our megaphones to make their risky admissions even louder. We must demand access to all those taking risks to challenge power, and access to power itself. We must refuse to simply read press releases and rely on official sources. And we must begin to enforce our own professional code of ethics. Refuse to compromise. Going along to getting along is getting us nowhere. Tonight, if I can convince you of anything, it is to buck the current system. Remember anew that you, as a journalist, are a public service, and your business is protecting the public from harm, even if those doing harm also pay your salary. To once again quote Ed Murrow, there is a great and perhaps decisive battle to be fought against ignorance, intolerance, and indifference. This weapon of television could be useful. And wouldn't it be great if our country could get used to that? Thank you very much.